When I was 21, I spent a lot of time alone at my parents' house. We lived right next to a small pond, with a little park on the other side. Our neighbors were far apart, and our street was fancy compared to the rest of the town. Now, I've moved out, but back then, I was in college. My parents had good jobs and owned several homes, so I often found myself home alone. One summer night, I was chilling in the back sunroom, my favorite spot in the house. The windows were wide open, and the breeze felt great. As I sat on the couch, I suddenly heard splashing from the pond. At first, I thought it was just some ducks or geese fighting, but the splashing kept going, and it sounded too heavy to be birds. Curious, I turned down the TV and pressed my ear to the window. What I heard next sent a chill down my spine. Someone was definitely splashing in the water. I stepped outside onto the deck to see who it was, and that's when I heard a man humming along with the splashes. Someone was swimming in our pond. Every house by the pond owned a part of it, so this felt really wrong. I quickly went back inside, turned on the deck lights, and peered outside, but the splashing and humming stopped. Whoever was out there had seen me. I wondered if it was a neighbor just taking a swim, but it felt strange since nobody ever swam in the pond. I wasn't about to confront a stranger, so I locked the door and texted my brother, who was away at college. He didn't respond right away, and I tried not to scare myself as I went back to watching TV, but it was hard to focus. I looked outside, and all I saw was darkness. The glow from the TV lit up the room, but I didn't realize how visible it made me. Just then, I thought I heard something on the deck. My heart raced as I quickly turned off the TV, plunging the room into darkness. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, and that's when I heard it. Someone was breathing heavily right outside one of the windows. I immediately lay flat on the couch, trying to hide. After a moment of silence, a deep voice from outside said, "I see you." My heart sank. I couldn't decide if I should speak or keep hiding, so I blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was one of our neighbors, and I clung to the hope that it might be him just messing around. But the man outside didn't reply. I just heard footsteps walking away. I stayed on the couch, too terrified to move. After a few minutes, I finally thought to check if all the doors were locked. I jumped off the couch and ran to the front door. Thankfully, it was locked. I checked the side entrance, and that was locked too. After texting my family about what happened, my dad told me to turn on the backyard lights and check if anyone was out there. He told me to be the man of the house and protect it, so I listened. Looking out the window, the backyard seemed clear. I took a big knife outside with me for protection and noticed something chilling. There were wet footprints on the deck, and they looked like bare feet. I followed the footprints around the side of the deck, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, peeking over the edge of the deck, was a person's head, just their eyes and forehead. They were staring at me, as if waiting for me to come closer. The moment we made eye contact, they turned away. I was ready to call 911, so I did before even telling my parents. I locked myself inside and waited for them to arrive. When they finally came, I felt a wave of relief. They asked if we had any enemies or neighbors we didn't get along with, then did a quick check of the property before leaving. That night, I made sure to close every window and ran the air conditioning for extra safety. The next morning, I was so happy to see the sunlight. I didn't think that man ever came back, and to this day, we still don't know who it was. Second story. I have a dog, and I take him for walks 3 times a day. Morning, afternoon, and night. We always take the same route, which leads to a parking lot for our condominium complex. This will make sense in a minute. On our night walks, I usually go pretty late. I've been doing this since I got my dog, and it's never been a problem. But one night, as we started our usual route, I had a flashlight because the parking lot is dark. I was listening to music with one earbud in, just in case I needed to hear something unusual. As we approached the parking lot, I thought I heard a voice ahead. I was lost in my music, but then I finally stopped, took out my earbud, and stood still to listen. That's when I heard it again, a voice coming from the darkness. I couldn't see anyone, so I did the dumb thing and kept walking forward, thinking I was imagining it. A few feet later, next to the parked cars, I pointed my flashlight around and heard something that sent chills down my spine. It sounded like a child's muffled voice saying, "Help." My heart dropped, and I froze. I shone my flashlight everywhere, but there was no one in sight. It was just me and my dog, who was busy sniffing bushes nearby. Then I heard it again, "Help," 3 more times, and it came from the left where the cars were parked. Panic surged through me. I knew I wasn't imagining it. My dog's ears perked up, and he looked in the same direction as I was facing. It struck me how eerie it all was. The voice didn't sound entirely like a kid. It was a strange mix of an adult and a child. Each time it called for help, the tone was flat, as if it wasn't a real cry for help. My dog and I bolted home, and I tried to tell my mom what happened. She was puzzled and didn't think we needed to call the police. I was filled with questions. Why was the voice muffled? Was there someone hiding in a car? Or was it something more sinister waiting for me to come closer? I didn't want to dwell on it, but it still disturbs me to this day. When I was about 10 years old and in the 5th grade, I reached that awkward age where it was considered uncool to sleep in my parents' bed after a nightmare. But I was still accused of having an overactive imagination. My nightlight was pretty cool. It had different colors, and I usually kept it on red. That's how I fell asleep most nights. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, which was unusual for me. I was super tired and dozed off again in under a minute. But before I did, I noticed my nightlight had changed to a different color. I didn't think much of it. A week later, I woke up and saw that my nightlight was once again not set to red. Confused, I asked my parents why they were messing with it. They looked puzzled and said they had no idea what I was talking about. I explained what happened, and they told me it was just a glitch. I accepted that for a while, until one morning when I found my nightlight completely unplugged, just sitting on the floor. When I asked my parents about it, they brushed off my concerns, telling me I should focus on school. My dad even said I was too old for a nightlight. A few days later, my nightlight disappeared entirely. I felt sure my parents were hiding it because they thought I should have outgrown it by then. This led to a huge fight between us, with both sides blaming the other. I couldn't believe my parents would lie to me about something like this. Things went back to normal for a week, but then I started waking up in the middle of the night 3 nights in a row. Each time, I had no idea what woke me up. After the 4th time, I told my parents, and they said it was just puberty. The next time I woke up, I decided to stay awake. A few minutes later, I heard faint rustling noises coming from my closet. My parents didn't believe me, so my dad checked the closet. He found nothing but old toys and posters. The next 4 nights were the most terrifying of my life. I kept waking up to rustling noises, and it felt like torture. I begged my parents to believe me, but my dad got angry and dragged me to the closet, throwing toys around and yelling. Then he pulled one of the posters off the wall, and we all stared in shock at a huge hole behind it. My mom started screaming while my dad grabbed a flashlight. The hole was too deep to see where it led, so he ran outside to check. He found a tiny hole at the base of the house, and a bit of digging revealed a passageway that connected the woods to my room. That night, my mom and I stayed at my aunt's house, and we moved out shortly after. I didn't like thinking about that experience, but I knew I had to face it eventually. My parents refused to talk about it, and I sensed they felt some blame for not taking me seriously. It was chilling to think a stranger had been in my room every night for over a month. I still have no idea what they wanted, and I might never know. So, if your kids come to you with something that seems strange, believe them. My name is Leo, and honestly, I feel a bit lost in life right now. I won't go into too much detail, but my family situation is terrible, and for the last 3 years, I've tried to stay away from home. My close friends from high school have changed in ways I don't like, and my hometown feels empty. I'm about to be a senior in college, and I have no clue what I'll do after that. Anyway, last year I found myself in Berlin. I think I was just searching for a sense of belonging. I remember being in a bar called Ruya, sitting alone, which was nothing new for me. I was about to leave when I realized I'd lost my apartment keys. Just my luck. I stumbled out of the bar and walked towards my apartment, but it was locked up tight. It was too late to get a spare set, so I started looking for a place to sleep. As if my luck couldn't get worse, it started raining. I ended up sleeping under a nearby bridge. I didn't know where I was, but at least I was out of the rain and safe. As I drifted off, I heard faint voices coming from across the river. I sat up and saw 5 men standing there with a small boat. They didn't seem to notice me, and it didn't take long for me to realize what was happening: a drug deal. I couldn't understand much German, but I saw briefcases and bags being exchanged. I thought about moving to a new spot, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I figured I'd just wait for them to finish. Suddenly, one of the men yelled something angrily and pointed a gun at another man. There was a moment of silence before the man with the gun demanded the other guy to raise his hands and started taking his clothes off. I felt scared and got up slowly to leave. I heard one of the men shout, "There's someone there." Panic set in, and I ran without looking back. They yelled more things, but the only words I caught were, "Don't shoot." I sprinted until I felt like I might throw up from exhaustion. They might not have caught me, but they could have easily ended my life. Sometimes, I think about how close I was to losing everything that night, and it feels like I'll be running forever. It was just a regular Friday afternoon at my high school. I was walking down the hall with my friend Emma while she chatted about something I wasn't really paying attention to. My mind was elsewhere. My foster parents weren't exactly kind, and I was just trying to make it through the day. As we passed the lunchroom, I suddenly felt the need to use the bathroom. I asked Emma if she wanted to come, but she said no and would wait for me outside. Once I entered the bathroom, I noticed it was completely empty. That was strange since this bathroom was usually crowded. I shrugged it off and went into a stall. A few seconds after I sat down, I heard the entrance door open and slam shut. Someone had come in, but I didn't hear them move. I figured they were hiding from a teacher, so I went about my business. When I stood up to button my jeans, I glanced at the wall covered in random quotes and complaints about teachers. Suddenly, I heard the door open again and assumed whoever was in there had left. As I walked out of the stall, Emma looked at me with a strange expression, almost like she was scared. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "Who was standing right behind you in the stall?" Chills ran down my spine. I told her no one was with me and to stop joking. But Emma insisted she had seen someone standing right behind me, their shoes touching mine in the stall. She said she came in just before I left and immediately saw someone in there with me. I didn't believe in ghosts, but this made my stomach drop. I found an administrator and told her, but she tried to assure me it didn't happen and that Emma was just messing with me. I knew Emma wasn't the type to joke around. When she looked me in the eye and told me what she saw, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Now that I'm 18, I still can't forget that day. This happened a while ago when I rented a small house in the town where I got my first real jobs. It was a cozy one-story house with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and just enough space for me to live and occasionally host friends. After a few weeks of living there, everything seemed fine. My landlord, whom I'll call Michelle, was really nice. I think she rented the place to me because she preferred having a female tenant. But then, a few weeks after I moved in, weird things started happening. One night, I heard a knock on the door. I called out, "Who is it?" but got no reply. I didn't open the door. No one should be knocking late at night. The next morning, as I left for work, I found a big note taped to the storm door. It said, "Hello, beautiful." Remembering the knocks from last night, I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was this person? I crumpled the note in disgust and tossed it in the trash, hoping it would be the last I heard of it. But that night, I heard another knock. This time, it was earlier while I was cooking dinner. I went to the door and stood quietly, listening. I had no peephole or window to see who was there, so opening the door felt risky. I realized this was turning into a stalking situation. I called my parents for advice. My dad, a retired police officer, told me that calling the cops wouldn't help unless they caught the person in the act. He advised me not to go outside late at night, not to answer the door, and said he'd come to stay with me if things got worse. I took his advice. The next morning, I checked the storm door, and my heart sank when I saw another note stuck to the glass. This one said, "I like to watch you." I snapped a picture and sent it to my family and my friend Michelle. I asked if she had any issues with stalkers. She was shocked and assured me she was in a long-term relationship and had no stalkers. I still wasn't convinced. After work that day, I left a note on the door saying, "If you're looking for Michelle, she doesn't live here. If you keep coming by, I'll report this to the police." Writing that note gave me some comfort, and I hoped it would end things. That night, I went to bed anxious, expecting more knocks. But to my relief, there were none. I woke up the next morning feeling hopeful until I opened the door. It wasn't my note I found. It was a new one that said, "I'm not looking for Michelle. I'm looking for you," followed by my name and, "I like watching you." I felt sick and sent it to my dad right away. He quickly packed a bag and drove up to stay with me. When I got home from work, my dad was already there. My day had been rough. I couldn't focus on anything but the fear of what was happening. I even wondered if it could be a coworker, like this creepy guy named Fernando. Later that night, my dad and I decided to call the police. We thought it would be better for them to see a police presence. An officer came, and my dad, being a retired cop, had some influence. After taking a report, the officer left, but my dad stayed on the front stoop for hours, even after I went to bed. Fortunately, the stalker didn't return that night. Once I was able to pack my things, I moved out. Michelle was very understanding. Thankfully, the stalker didn't follow me to my new place, which ruled out the chance it was someone I knew. I'll probably never know who it was, but I've spent more time chasing women than I'd like to admit. Since college, I've had to tone it down. Back in California, where I went to school, the culture was very open, especially when it came to dating. During my sophomore year, I had just joined the fraternity Pike, but I grew tired of only talking to sorority girls who seemed to know every guy in every frat. It felt gross, and I started to worry that every girl I liked had been with someone I knew. So I created a Tinder profile. Before long, I matched with someone who seemed to share my feelings. After a few days of chatting, we made plans to meet at my favorite bar, Tap House, which had pool tables. I arrived a bit early to secure a table. After waiting for an hour, I thought maybe I'd been stood up. Just then, I got a message from her saying she had just arrived. I greeted her, and she apologized for being late. We got drinks, played pool, and hit it off. She was Latina and loved to drink, so I ended up pretty plastered trying to keep up. At one point, she asked for my Instagram. When I gave it to her, she sent me a bunch of explicit photos. I was confused, but in my drunken state, I didn't complain. Before I could respond, she said, "Your turn." Honestly, if I hadn't been so drunk, I might have questioned why we were sending each other pictures when we were just a few feet apart, but I went along with it. As the night wound down, I was planning to invite her to my place, but she beat me to it and asked if I could stay at hers. I agreed, even though I could barely walk straight. We took an Uber to her apartment in Oakland, a detail I didn't realize until we crossed the line into the city. She unlocked the door and let me go in first. As I stepped inside, I heard the door slam shut behind me. The room was pitch black. Just as I turned to ask her to turn on the lights, the room lit up, and I was faced with two huge bald guys in tank tops, standing in front of the door with their arms crossed. I turned around to find another bald guy blocking my way. I wish I could tell you more about that room, but it's all a blur. I froze as the guy in front of me started listing my name, birthday, and age. Then he revealed that the girl I had just gone out with was only 17. I realized I had sent explicit photos to a minor. He told me to do what he said, and I complied. The two men behind me took my phone, wallet, and keys without a fight. When I asked what they wanted, the guy explained that he was a major drug distributor in Northern California. He said I would be outed as a criminal if I didn't sell his product to my fraternity and the university. The men handed me a piece of paper and told me to write down my address and as many names and numbers of students I knew. I told them I'd need my phone to complete the list, and one of them held it up, letting me scroll through my contacts. They all hovered over me, and I felt completely trapped. But then, something inside me snapped. The second I saw my chance, I bolted. I was too drunk to think about the consequences of those pictures on my phone. I ran through the door and took off as fast as I could, knowing I was still in one of the most dangerous places in America. Eventually, I found a nice-looking house and begged the people inside to let me use their phone to call 911. I told the police everything, but I didn't remember the address of the girl's apartment. An officer picked me up and took my report. He asked if I could lead them back to her place, and surprisingly, I retraced my steps. I waited in a squad car while they went in. After a few minutes, an officer came back and told me the apartment was empty. No signs of anyone being there. In the following weeks, the police took my report seriously and launched a full investigation. They thought it might be gang-related, but they never arrested anyone. That was years ago. I bet this incident has been buried under Oakland's crime and drug activity. Honestly, what happened to me probably isn't even on the radar for that place. I haven't used a dating app in ages. For years, I've been smoking cigarettes every day. Before you judge me, let me explain. I recently started seeing a therapist for my nicotine addiction, but sadly, it hasn't helped much. My sleep schedule is even worse than my smoking habit. I stay up late, often past midnight, and hardly get out of bed before noon. While I'm trying to change these things, they're important to the story I'm about to tell you. A few months ago, I was standing on my balcony, like I do most nights, having a smoke. I live in a quiet neighborhood where the houses are pretty far apart. I've never met my neighbor, but I always noticed a navy blue BMW in his driveway, which made me think he lived alone. But one night, I saw a black van parked in front of his house. At first, I didn't think much of it, it was just a coincidence. That next night, I spotted the same black van again. Instead of feeling suspicious, I was just curious. When morning came, the van was gone, but I couldn't shake the urge to keep an eye on it. I became a bit obsessed, which probably pushed my friends away. I promised myself I wouldn't get involved, but one night changed everything. It was around 5 a.m. when I finally saw my neighbor. He walked outside, struggling with a long black bag that looked like it could hold golf clubs, but it seemed much heavier. He opened the sliding door of the van and carefully placed the bag inside. Then he jumped into the driver's seat and drove off. I was shocked, my mind racing with questions about what was in that bag. The next day, I decided to wait for the van again. I took my laptop to the balcony to work while I watched. Around 1 a.m., the van finally returned. I quickly shut my laptop and focused on what was happening. The driver's door opened, and my neighbor got out, struggling with that same heavy bag. He waddled a few steps before disappearing into his house. I felt a chill creep over me. I considered staying up until 5 a.m. again, but that seemed exhausting. Still, something felt off, and I was determined to find out what was going on. The next morning, I flipped a coin and decided to follow his van that night. After a long day, I returned to my balcony around 4 a.m. As soon as I saw movement in his driveway, I rushed downstairs, grabbed my keys, and hopped in my car. I turned off my headlights and waited for the van to hit the main road. When it did, I started following him. After about 20 minutes, he took a dirt path leading into the woods. I followed, and the trees started to thin out, revealing what looked like an old road. We drove for a few more minutes until I realized where we were headed. A deserted gas station tucked away in the woods. Right in front was the BMW I always saw parked at his place. Feeling nervous, I turned my car around and parked across the street from the dirt road. I must have waited for an hour before the BMW finally left. My heart raced as I drove back up the path, unsure of what I would find. I parked on the side of the road and walked toward the gas station. It felt eerie. The front door was locked, as was the back. I really wanted to see what was inside. I tried opening a row of windows, but none budged. Against my better judgment, I picked up a rock and smashed one of the windows. It shattered easily, but then I heard a loud alarm ringing. I sprinted back to my car, wondering why an abandoned gas station would have an alarm. I sped away and called 911, giving a vague description before hanging up. When I got home, my heart was still racing. The next morning, I woke up hoping everything had blown over. I was wrong. I went up to my balcony and saw a swarm of police cars in my neighbor's driveway, lights flashing. I watched as an officer led my neighbor out of his house in handcuffs. One by one, the police cars drove away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I've asked the police for details several times, but they've never answered my questions. I even tried going back to that gas station, but the road was blocked off. Maybe one day, I'll find the courage to walk through the woods and discover more. I've never had any sleep issues like sleep paralysis or night terrors. I've always been a heavy sleeper. So, when what I'm about to share started happening, I was really surprised. We all have the occasional nightmare, right? I used to think of nightmares as free horror movies. It might sound strange, but I kind of enjoyed the thrill of waking up after a scary dream. I lived with my roommate, Patricia. Everyone called her Trish. Our work schedules were so different that we barely saw each other, except on weekends. This all started in July when it was super hot, so I had the AC running full blast every night, which helped me sleep. On the first night of the nightmare, I remember sitting at a dinner table surrounded by my family. Then, I saw this creature that looked like an alien from a movie, but with horns and claws. It felt like a classic sleep paralysis demon. Suddenly, the creature was right next to me, and I ran away until I found myself back in my room, or at least my brain's version of it. That was the last thing I remembered before waking up in a dark room, AC blasting, heart racing. I looked around, thinking, wow, that was creepy. I laid back down and tried to sleep. The next night, I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open. I usually keep it shut unless I've been drinking. I thought it was Trish checking on me, so I got up to close it and quickly fell back asleep. The next day, I texted Trish to ask if she'd come in. She hadn't, which made me wonder if I just sleepwalked to the bathroom or kitchen without remembering. The following night, I had another nightmare, and that same demon appeared again. This time, it was even scarier. Instead of my family, I was in a dark, empty room with that creature getting closer and closer. I don't remember it moving its limbs, but it was right above me, and I couldn't move. Then it scratched my thigh, and I think I felt the pain. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a dark room again, AC running. But this time, I felt a stinging pain on my upper thigh. I rushed to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, screaming when I saw a gash on my thigh. I ran to Trish's room, turned on the light, and woke her up. She was shocked and asked how I got hurt. I screamed, "I don't know." We went to my room and flipped off the sheets, looking for bugs or anything sharp that could have cut me. I know it sounds silly, but what else could we think? Trish then put her finger to her lips, signaling for quiet. She turned off the AC unit, and for the first time in days, the room was silent. Suddenly, we both heard a faint noise from under my bed, like a person was hiding there. Surprisingly, we didn't scream. We just looked at each other, then at the bed, and decided to leave the room and the apartment. We knocked on the neighbor's door until he answered, asking for help. When I was a kid, something really strange happened in our apartment. An older man was there, and we definitely didn't expect him to get into a fight with someone. He was nice enough to let us use his phone to call 911. While we waited for the police, we heard a loud bang that sounded like our door slamming shut. We couldn't look out the window fast enough to see who it was. When the police arrived, they confirmed the intruder was gone. In our rush to escape, we left all the lights on in the apartment. So the intruder knew we were aware of him. It got me thinking about my dreams and how they connected to that night. The person I dreamt about must have been him. The door had been opened that night, which meant he could have been wandering around our home, maybe even eating our food. It's really disturbing to think about, especially since he actually scratched my thigh hard enough to leave a mark. This experience changed how I view dreams and nightmares forever. This all happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. My older brother and I shared a big bedroom on the top floor, which used to be a separate apartment rented by an old lady who had moved out. The layout was simple. Our bedroom was on the left, the bathroom was straight ahead, and there was an extra kitchen and a small bedroom on the right. We had so many toys in our room, it was huge. There were even 2 big closets filled with toys and board games. One toy that stood out was a race car with lots of buttons. Pressing the buttons would make the lights flash and play sounds like honking and revving. It was a gift from my brother when he was younger. One night, while we were both in bed and not yet asleep, the toy suddenly turned on, revving loudly and lighting up the room. I was scared and thought my brother, Luke, did it to scare me. He laughed and said he didn't touch it. The toy eventually stopped, but I was really unsettled. I eventually fell asleep, but the strange happenings didn't end there. Another night, Luke and I heard a weird thud in the room. Luke teased me, saying there was a ghost, and I yelled at him to stop or I'd tell Mom. But then we saw the toy car light up in the corner of the room. I jumped out of bed and ran down the stairs, screaming for Mom. When I got to my parents' room, I told them something was in our room, giving my best scary story about the ghost and the car. Luke followed me and tried to defend himself, saying he couldn't have turned on the lights from his bed. That night, I slept in my parents' room because I was too scared to stay upstairs. After that, things were quiet for a long time. But one night, when Luke was at a sleepover, I was alone in our room. I had put the scary toy car away in a small bedroom across the hall because it freaked me out. After Mom kissed me goodnight, I asked her to leave the door open since I was scared of being alone. I rolled over, trying to sleep, but I felt wide awake. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise from down the hall, and then the toy car rolled into my room with its lights on. I screamed so loud and pressed myself against the wall, crying for my mom. A few moments later, my parents came upstairs. They saw the car on the floor, and I shouted that it rolled in by itself. My dad checked all the rooms, but there was no one hiding anywhere. They probably thought it was a toy malfunction or just my imagination, but deep down, I think they were a bit freaked out. The car couldn't move on its own. To make me feel better, my dad smashed the toy and threw it in the neighbor's trash. I slept in my parents' room for a while until my dad insisted I go back upstairs. This experience is why I believe in the paranormal and that there's something after death.